Let's get something straight right from the start. A narcissist doesn't fall apart because they miss you. They fall apart because your absence exposes the truth they've spent their entire life running from. And here's the twist. You were the one thing keeping their world stitched together. You might think you were weak. Watch what happens when someone who actually cared finally walks away. If this resonates so far, stay with me, because the next part explains exactly why their collapse is not your responsibility and why walking away was the most powerful act of self-respect you've ever made. When we say a narcissist doesn't lose people, they lose supply, it means their emotional framework is fundamentally different from yours. You attach to someone because of connection, shared experience, closeness, empathy, and genuine care. A narcissist attaches to someone because of utility. You are not a partner in the emotional sense. You are a function, a source of psychological fuel. But when the person they lose is someone who genuinely cared, the impact cuts deeper because that supply wasn't superficial. It was stabilizing, grounding, and emotionally consistent, things a narcissist desperately needs but can't internally generate. A caring person gives them validation that feels richer, steadier, and more nourishing than the fleeting attention they chase from others. It's the kind of validation that makes them feel human rather than hollow, significant rather than fragile. They don't consciously appreciate it and they don't reciprocate it, but they rely on it in ways they never admit. This kind of supply isn't about ego strokes. It's about emotional containment. A caring person soothes their spiraling insecurities, softens their anger, helps them regulate their moods, and tolerates their volatility. The narcissist doesn't experience this as love. They experience it as equilibrium. You become the invisible buffer that keeps their inner chaos from flooding into their external world. So when they lose someone who actually cared, the crash is different. The supply isn't easily replaceable. They can get attention anywhere. They can garner admiration, desire, or compliance with very little effort. But emotional steadiness, authentic presence, someone who genuinely sees their pain even when they hide it, that is rare. They don't fall apart because they love the person. They fall apart because that person's absence removes the internal scaffolding they leaned on, often without realizing it. It exposes the emotional deficit they spend their entire life avoiding. They feel the void more intensely because the caring person filled it more effectively than anyone else. That's why losing someone who genuinely cared destabilizes them so profoundly. It reminds them that without external emotional support, they can't maintain the identity or stability they pretend to have. When a narcissist loses someone who genuinely cared, they aren't just losing companionship or attention. They are confronted with a psychological truth they are structured to avoid at all costs: the emptiness inside them. Narcissism is built on a fragile sense of self that can't regulate, soothe, or stabilize from within. They spend their entire lives constructing elaborate defenses: grandiosity, entitlement, blame-shifting, image management, charm, manipulation, to avoid facing that inner void. These are not random behaviors. They are survival strategies that keep the narcissist from ever having to look inward. But when a caring person leaves, those defenses collapse just enough for reality to seep in. This is why the loss hits harder. A caring person often functions as emotional insulation, softening the narcissist's edges, anchoring their mood swings, and providing a sense of continuity and connection they cannot generate themselves. They become a stabilizing force even when they're being mistreated. So when that stabilizing force disappears, it's not just absence, it's exposure. Suddenly, the narcissist is left with the raw truth they've avoided their entire life. Without someone emotionally grounded beside them, they unravel quickly. The empty parts of them become harder to hide behind charm or arrogance. The noise inside their mind grows louder because there's no calming presence to drown it out. This loss also destroys one of their most important illusions: the belief that they are inherently desirable, irreplaceable, and worthy of devotion without effort. A caring person doesn't just give validation, they give depth. They offer something steady, warm, and human. Losing that forces the narcissist to confront the fact that they weren't able to keep someone who was patient, empathetic, and truly committed. That realization scratches at their deepest shame, the suspicion that there is something fundamentally defective about them. Instead of processing that shame, they push it outward. They project blame, devalue the person they lost, and rewrite the story so they aren't the one who failed. But even with all that mental contortion, a specific discomfort lingers. A caring person saw them in ways superficial admirers never do. They noticed their fears, their patterns, their fragility. And now that person is gone. The narcissist knows, consciously or not, that the only person who truly understood their chaos has walked away. This loss briefly exposes the truth that they depend on others for emotional structure and identity. And facing that truth, even indirectly, is one of the most destabilizing experiences a narcissist can have. When they lose someone who genuinely cared, the destabilization that follows is rooted in one fundamental reality. Their entire sense of self is externally constructed. Unlike emotionally healthy individuals who develop an inner framework of identity through reflection, growth, accountability, and self-awareness, a narcissist relies almost entirely on external validation to feel like someone. Their self-worth isn't internally generated, it's borrowed. Their identity isn't stable, it's reactive. They exist as a reflection of how others perceive them. This means that every compliment, every reassurance, every sacrifice, and every bit of emotional labor from a caring person becomes part of the narcissist's psychological scaffolding. The caring person isn't just a partner or friend. They are a mirror reflecting back a version of the narcissist that makes them feel significant, admirable, or superior. They help regulate the narcissist's mood swings, insecurities, and impulses just by being present and steady. The narcissist unconsciously leans on this stability to maintain their illusion of having a solid identity. But because this entire setup is external, it's fragile. When that caring person leaves, the narcissist is left without an internal structure to fall back on. It's as if the lights go out in a room they never learned how to navigate. They can no longer rely on that steady emotional reflection to tell them who they are. Without it, the carefully constructed persona they show the world begins to crack. This is why their reactions seem so extreme. Rage, panic, frantic attempts to replace you, sudden depression, or reckless behavior. These responses aren't about missing you as an individual. They're about losing the psychological anchor that kept them from collapsing into their own emotional disorganization. The caring person's validation served as a stabilizing force, preventing their fragile self-esteem from unraveling completely. And perhaps the most painful irony is that the narcissist rarely realizes how much of their identity depended on that stability, until it's gone. They don't have a stable internal core to rely on. They depend on the emotional energy of those around them, especially those who care deeply and consistently. So when that person walks away, the narcissist faces a sudden void. The absence hits like a psychological freefall because, without external validation, their sense of self struggles to remain intact. Their identity was never strong enough to withstand the loss of someone who provided emotional grounding. That's why the collapse is so intense. Losing someone who cared doesn't just hurt their ego, it destabilizes the very foundation of who they believe they are. A caring person often becomes something the narcissist depends on without ever acknowledging it, a buffer between them and their internal chaos. Narcissists live with a constant undercurrent of insecurity, shame, fear of inadequacy, and emotional dysregulation. These feelings are overwhelming, so they rely heavily on the presence of stable, empathetic individuals to absorb, soothe, or neutralize these storms. A caring partner becomes the emotional shock absorber in the relationship, taking on the emotional burden the narcissist refuses to confront. This buffering happens subtly. The caring person interprets the narcissist's moods, smooths conflicts, de-escalates tension, explains their behavior to others, and keeps the peace. They remind them of important tasks, support their goals, and protect them from the consequences of their impulsivity. They step in when the narcissist spirals, panics, or unravels emotionally. Even when the narcissist lashes out, the caring person responds with patience, logic, and empathy, qualities the narcissist cannot generate internally. All of this creates a stabilizing effect. The narcissist leans on this person's emotional management to stay functional. The caring partner organizes the emotional climate of the relationship in a way that makes the narcissist's life more balanced than it would be on its own. And because this support becomes so normalized, the narcissist takes it for granted. They assume this stability is automatic, not recognizing that it comes from the effort, love, and emotional strength of the person who cares. But when that caring presence is removed, the narcissist is suddenly exposed to their own unmanaged emotional world. The chaos they've always kept at bay begins to pour in. There is no one to deflect their anger, soften their anxiety, or stabilize their impulses. Their internal emotional state becomes externalized, often erupting as rage, confusion, depression, or reckless behavior. They feel more irritable, unstable, and lost. Not because they miss the person, but because the person who once regulated their emotional storms is no longer there. They no longer have someone who intuitively stepped in to make things smoother, calmer, or safer. This exposure is deeply destabilizing. The narcissist is forced to confront the unfiltered version of themselves, the one they've spent their life avoiding. And because they lack the skills to self-regulate, the internal chaos they once managed through the caring person now overwhelms them. Losing that buffer means losing the fragile emotional equilibrium they depended on more than they realized. When a narcissist loses someone who genuinely cared, one of the most devastating internal consequences is the collapse of their grand narrative. This narrative is the psychological story they tell themselves. One where they are always the hero, the admirable one, the victim when it suits, the misunderstood genius, the righteous partner, or the irresistible figure. This story props up their fragile ego, giving them a sense of superiority and certainty in a world they feel secretly unprepared to face. A caring person plays a unique role in reinforcing this narrative, not because they believe in the narcissist's fantasy, but because their emotional steadiness helps create an environment where the narcissist can maintain the illusion. They absorb the narcissist's insecurities and make their emotional world seem less chaotic. They explain behavior, support goals, offer compassion, and soften the consequences of the narcissist's actions, often unknowingly. They help maintain this internal story the narcissist lives by. But when that person is gone, the facade-like narrative begins to crack. Suddenly, the narcissist can no longer sustain the story that they are exceptional, adored, or blameless. They face the uncomfortable possibility that if they truly are who they claim to be, they wouldn't have driven away someone who genuinely cared. That loss introduces cognitive dissonance. Their story says, "I am special and people are lucky to have me," but reality now says, "Someone who loved me walked away." The pain of that contradiction destabilizes them. In response, they scramble to rewrite the narrative as quickly as possible. They may vilify the person who left, portraying them as disloyal, unstable, ungrateful, or unworthy. They may portray themselves as the victim, the abandoned one, and twist the story so that the loss fits their identity without forcing them to confront fault or vulnerability. Even with all this revision, the original fracture doesn't fully heal. That fracture grows because losing a caring person removes the emotional buffer that made their grandiosity seem plausible. There's no one left to listen to their insecurities, to rebuild them after meltdowns, or to praise their efforts when they feel inadequate. Without that reinforcement, their inflated self-image becomes harder to sustain. Doubt seeps in. Not the kind they acknowledge out loud, but the kind that agitates them at night, fuels rage, and drives frantic attempts to replace you. The collapse of their narrative isn't just an emotional reaction. It's an identity-level destabilization. Their sense of self becomes shaky, inconsistent, desperate. They must work twice as hard to uphold a version of themselves that once relied heavily on the emotional grounding you provided. Losing someone who cared means losing the story that protected them from their own truth. When a narcissist loses someone who genuinely cared, They often spiral into a frantic cycle of distraction, rage, and desperate attempts to regain control. Not because they truly miss the person, but because their psychological ecosystem has been disrupted. Their internal world is unstable even on a good day, held together by external reinforcement, routine admiration, and emotional regulation from others. When that caring presence disappears, the narcissist is left without the emotional glue that kept their inner chaos from surfacing. What follows is a rapid, disorganized attempt to outrun the collapse they can feel rising from within. One of the first responses is frantic distraction. Narcissists cannot sit alone with their thoughts. Solitude exposes the emptiness they spend their lives avoiding. So they plunge into anything that keeps their mind noisy. New relationships, work overdrive, excessive social media presence, impulsive purchases, parties, drama, anything that pulls their attention outward. But these distractions don't soothe them, they only delay the discomfort.